Welcome to the NVRMR podcast.
David, you are very knowledgeable about this issue. You have been writing songs about it, talking about it for at least 20 years. You've been to Palestine. You want to talk about, do you want to establish your relationship to the Palestinian cause?
On the subjects that we were basically more or less talking about, as far as cancel campaigning and also the social engineering of it, I've collected together a bunch of my writings in davidrovics.com/trolls and davidrovics.com/social, which has a lot of that stuff, and a lot of Palestine stuff at davidrovics.com/Palestine. But what's going on there is a genocidal bombing campaign that the Western media is completely facilitating, but with totally dishonest coverage of what's going on, and which they've been doing for many decades, always, and for the entire existence of the state of Israel. It's just dishonest journalism coming out of most of the Western media. And I mean, I can say, as somebody who has been following American and broader Western media for many decades, that this is just what we're getting is overwhelmingly just complete propaganda about what's going on there. That is just allowing this to continue. And even with that being the case, most 60% of U.S. people polled say they support a ceasefire, but nobody in the Senate does, and only a handful of people in the U.S. House of Representatives. And it's what we have is a genocidal regime that is completely sponsored by the U.S. Politically and militarily, and this has been the case for a long time, but now it's all becoming overwhelmingly apparent to a whole lot of people who weren't thinking that Israel was actually a fascist state at this point, but it is, and it has been for quite a while, and I mean, and the roots of the phenomenon of the Zionist project, that and the colonial facilitation of it that gave rise to the state of Israel is the roots of it in the first place are totally about settler colonialism, but and genocide, of the sort of massacring people and just burning their villages down so they run away and go somewhere else, that kind of genocide. That was what founded the state of Israel in 1948. And that's they never let those people back in. Of the 750,000 Palestinians estimated that were driven out of what is now the 48 borders of Israel, 10,000 of them were allowed to return home. And the rest never. And they are populating the Gaza Strip's refugee camps and dying in like Jabalia refugee camp, which was completely destroyed, hundreds of people killed, mostly children. And they are mostly people that were resettled there after they fled their homes in 48 Israel, Palestine. And of course, everything you hear about who they are and how they got there and what's going on in Gaza from the Western media is most of it is just either propaganda or just really unbalanced and giving credence to Israeli politicians who should have no legitimacy in the eyes of the Western media in the first place, because they're blatantly fascists who are advocating genocide, and that's obvious. They're talking about it. They're saying it. They're not just doing it. They're actually saying, this is what we're doing and this is what we're going to continue to do. They're not lying about it. Just like Hitler, they're not lying about it. He said he was going to do it too. He wrote a book about it.
when did you get started championing the Palestinian cause? Because I understand you're Jewish, and I'm just curious if you don't mind sharing with us, like, what brought you to either, your activism based around Palestine and also visiting Palestine. Maybe you could give us a bit of your personal history there.
Well, I started reading the New York Times when I was 12 because I wanted to try to understand the world better, and I thought randomly in the little suburb of Connecticut I lived in, that seemed like the best way to do it. And it wasn't too bad of a method. I quickly realized that they had a bias, and that I started trying to find other media sources with more difficulty in the library in Wilton High School. But even then, I guess I think 1982 was when I first started reading the Times every day, and that's when the war on Lebanon was going on, and the Sabra and Shatila massacre. That was one of the first things I started reading newspapers. I was just like, what the hell? This is what's going on out there. But so I was. I could also tell that the Times was trying to tell us that the PLO were terrorists, but at the same time, it's long form journalism. So long form journalism always looks more progressive than short form, because if they tell more of the truth, then the truth will, come through and present itself. And even if they're and start the narrative at some convenient point and stuff like that. If they're giving any background, then it starts becoming clear, like, oh, okay, they're occupying this country and they're facilitating this genocide. So I had a bias in favor of the Palestinian struggle from an early age, but it wasn't until I didn't really start writing songs and performing until much later, and having any kind of a public voice. And so it was, and I hadn't written any songs about Palestine until after I first went to Israel and Palestine in 1999. And then once I wrote a song about after the second Intifada started, then that's what basically set in motion both me being accused of anti-Semitism and me not getting any gigs in Israel anymore. Not that I would necessarily do them. Well, I would do them if there were enough gigs to do for the left in Israel. I don't believe in boycotting the Israeli left. I would totally go there if I could. But there's not enough of a left scene to organize gigs for me there. I never get offers, since the folk music scene is big enough to organize a tour. But if they think I'm an anti-Semite, obviously that's not going to happen. But it was after that when I first visited that and wrote a song about it, that I then started hearing from Palestinians from around the world, which was just a profoundly moving and amazing experience. It was 1 week after. At first I wrote the song, then it got out to the Israeli folk music community. Then I started getting deluged by hate mail, emails from Israelis and also from Zionists across the Jewish diaspora. And then 1 week later, I started getting about 10 times as many emails from Palestinians from across the Palestinian diaspora who had also heard about the song, and so that set in motion me basically playing for a lot of Palestinians and going to Palestine and meeting more and more Palestinians and hearing more stories and writing more songs, and it's a snowball effect. Once you start getting involved with a certain community and a certain struggle and becoming more familiar with it, more knowledgeable about it, writing more about it, you start meeting more and more people from that scene. And so it's just, so now, not that I don't care about the people of Kashmir, but I know very little about what's going on there. And I only know one Kashmiri, and I know a lot of Palestinians. So it's, just how it goes.
It's close to your heart.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Palestine is close to my heart, and it's also so iconically sort of representation of the Western double standard around everything, foreign policy.
Oh yeah, People say that it's complicated, but it's not.
Oh, that's
No,
the propaganda. That's the propaganda that I couldn't stand from the beginning. And honestly, this is what would get me in arguments with people all the time. I also went to Tel Aviv. I was in Tel Aviv as a dancer back in the day, and I got to do a lot of traveling with this dance company. But it was during one of the times that Israel was bombing Red Crosses and Gaza, and I was there, and it was really upsetting. And I remember trying to have these conversations with people. And if they weren't straight up racist, like we met locals in Tel Aviv on the beach, and we go to smoke a joint, and my friend that I was touring with was like, please don't talk about politics with them. Please don't fuck this up. And I was like, because he was like really excited to be invited to these Israeli girls' apartment. And the minute we smoked that joint, I was just like, I just had to know how they really felt. I said, I was like, how do you feel in your heart, like about the fact that innocent children and women are being bombed in Red Cross buildings just over there,
Yeah.
And their response was, "Oh, Palestinians are dogs. They deserve to die like dogs." Like just this amazing dehumanization and programming that they've been fed probably since they were children.
Yep.
And honestly, I sat through it. It made me feel really awful, but I sat through it, and then I was like, but in your heart, you can't imagine just the lottery, just rolling the dice, the genetic lottery of being born over there instead of being born over here. You can't imagine yourself being there, receiving bombs, like your whole life, instead of being here on the beach in Tel Aviv, living the fucking high life. And they were like, and one of them was like, no, honestly, if I think about it too much, it makes me too sad. And then I was like, oh,
well, that's good.
Yeah, so here we are. Like now I understand. Now I can begin to understand this knee-jerk, cold, kind of like racist reaction is a protection from actually, being able to feel the sadness of what's going on over there.
Yeah,
anyway.
that's the basis of my song. They're building a wall, actually, too. Is that you're trying to keep separate, not just people, but really any kind of connection with those people.
They're building a wall between friends, a wall that justifies any means for their ends, a wall between Semites, rich and poor, brothers and sisters from not so long before, many feet thick and 20 feet high. No one can look through it and into the eye of a person you might know, to whom you might confide. Now just a stranger on the other side. They're building a wall between water and land, so we can eat fruit and they can eat sand. A wall to make sure that our orchards will grow and our kids can get fat and not need to know of the cities in ruins and the children in fear, that your fathers and brothers in tanks might be near. A wall to keep quiet that which you fear most, so you don't have to listen to your grandfather's ghost. They're building a wall between future and past, a wall to keep separate the chambers of gas from bulldozers, gunships, and the tears of a child. Dignity, love, and honor defiled, to remove reality from your facts on the ground. A wall to keep distant the terrible sound of the houses that crumble and the children that die. A wall to keep separate the truth from the lie. They're building a wall, and at such a cost, land, money, and safety all the lives lost. A wall made of brick, but bricks can be broken when the people of Zion have finally awoken and said no more walls, no more refugees, no more keeping people upon their knees. And then the history books will someday recall, before apartheid was ended, they were building a wall.
What would you say the role of being an artist in resistance movements, or in anti-war movements and political struggle at large? Like, how would you define that and your own experience in that?
The role of music in resistance, I think it's been really, music and culture, theater, dance, it's been central to resistance movements around the world since there have been resistance movements, and that's well documented. And that continues to be the case, and it continues to be the case, throughout the Arab world as well, at all the demonstrations. I'm sure there's in some places like there'd be laws against it, like Saudi Arabia or whatever, but like places like where you're allowed to play music and the Wahhabis are not in power, there's music everywhere. Like the Palestinians protesting every day in Jordan, they're playing lots of music, appropriately, revolutionary music. And it's only in certain corners of the West where really weird people who have spent way too much time in college classrooms or something get the idea that there's something frivolous about music and something like disrespectful or something like that. Like, these are people who have no connection to actual social movements, because if they did, then they would have seen on many occasions in many countries everywhere, how important music is to galvanize, to bring people together, to maintain a sense of community and purpose and everything. I mean, music is essential, just as theater and poetry. And poetry is not so big in North America, but in much of the world, poetry is like massively popular and massively important culturally, and lots of people write it and are engaged with it and appreciate it. Places like all over the Arab world and all of the Chinese speaking world. Yeah.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to. Do you want to comment a bit more on? I personally think that it's really important to create a joyful culture of resistance, and maybe that's what
music and culture does that automatically. I mean, because music and culture being part of the resistance movement makes it a joyful resistance movement. I mean, that's by default, that's how it works, because hearing a depressing song about bombs killing people is actually bizarrely a joyful experience in a way. It's a cathartic experience when an artist or a dance troupe or any number of other, any kind of art is expressing what you are thinking about and feeling every day. That is cathartic, and catharsis leads to joy. And you have a cathartic experience. It makes you be more connected to the people around you, to the movement and everything.
Ask me how it is that I dare to take a side. You say I loathe myself, pointing out you have lied. You say it's tribal warfare, but I disagree, for the dynamics of the situation are not difficult to see. On the one side is the fighter jet, on the other is the stone. On the one side is the slave, on the other is the throne. For the many there are checkpoints, while foreign soldiers rule the streets. For the one side there is victory, but the people don't accept defeat. The word you need to know is occupation, the very definition of a land without a nation. And if peace is what you're after, then let us not deceive. It'll come on the day the tanks return to Tel Aviv. On the one side there is hunger and bulldozed olive trees. On the other is the army, ruling by decrees. Caterpillars maul the streets, destroy whole city blocks, while children swallow shrapnel for the crime of throwing rocks. Fences are erected around the towns they flatten, and Herzl's own fanatics sleep on sheets of satin, and they water their plantations, drilling ever deeper wells, while the displaced children of the hopeless are filled with bullet shells. The word you need to know is occupation, the very definition of a land without a nation. And if peace is what you're after, then let us not deceive. It'll come on the day the settlers return to Tel Aviv. On the one side there's the Mossad, rounding up the men thrown in jail with no trial, being tortured once again. On the other there is rage, helplessness and fear, and a growing realization that another Holocaust is near. On the outside there are prisons, the inside detainees being stripped of their humanity, beaten naked to their knees. Outside the ghetto walls, stormtroopers all around, while inside the hungry people yearn for liberated ground. The word you need to know is occupation, the very definition of a land without a nation. And if peace is what you're after, then let us not deceive. It'll come on the day the jail guards return to Tel Aviv. All across the world you can hear the people say the children of Jerusalem will be free one day. In overcrowded camps amidst the stench of death and flies to the suburbs of Detroit, you can hear the anguish cries, while in the land of Israel with God ever on their side, walls and fences are constructed, papers are denied. People fight for their existence while we turn a blinded eye, and those who should know better insist on asking why. The word you need to know is occupation, the very definition of a land without a nation. And if peace is what you're after, then let us not deceive. It will come on the day the refugees return to Tel